marvellous things that we don't hear about every day, but I get of it. And I was so pleased that we're still standing, still rattling the pages brilliantly well. Hope you continue to do so.
Congratulations, Janelle, on your new position. I know that you will strive to fulfil all those 17 goals. I begin by sharing the acknowledgement of the traditional owners and paying my respects to elders of all cultures. I actually rate myself as the #1 fan of both the combined junior choir and Leah Cottrell, and I just want to thank them both for providing the music for us this afternoon. Leah, I was right back in the Toowoomba Folk Club, singing along there with Bridge Over Troubled Waters, and with due apology to the woman sitting beside me for that process. Deb, I'm not going to embarrass you because the introduction's always good, so what I'm going to do is be very quick. This is our chance today, and Mel talked about the international messages of peace. We all have the opportunity to make our own personal commitment to peace today, and also to take our message out. And part of the way we can do that is to listen to a woman who I have never considered to be a peaceful woman. It's never, when I think of the adjectives to describe you, peace hasn't always jumped to mind. But in terms of process, what I do know is that you are a genuine fighter for equity and justice, particularly for women who have been in prison or are in prison, or those who could be facing the prison system. A long time ago, there was a book written about Deb, which I actually do commend to all of you to find. It's a book called Kilroy Was Here. And when I heard about tonight, I actually dug through the library and found my copy, which I'll get you to sign one. Don't worry about it. Well, you already have. I haven't read about that process, but in this book, it actually talks about the work Deb had done. We actually need another couple of chapters because 10 years have gone past since that book was originally released. At that time, Deb had just won the Human Rights Medal for her work, which fits into the work we do here in terms of human rights. She's also been an Australian, an Order of Australia, and also been the inspiration for women everywhere, I think, who need to face up to how their lives could have hope. Whilst peace is not there, I just want to quote one sentence in the book. And it talks about the fact that she continues to struggle for what she believes is important. And I reckon this kind of sums it up. It says, to the end, Deb continues to lobby, negotiate, browbeat, harangue and question decision makers at every level of government and in the community to consider the terrible failure that prisons have become. Deb, thank you. Very much thank you. I am so proud that I actually call you mate, and we can all hear from our woman of peace who fights for peace, Deb Kilroy.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Because I've got this on and this on, so is the echo okay? I was warned about the echo. Sweet. And the bucket's going around, just so all of you know that I was raised a Catholic, I'm not practicing Catholic, and when the bucket or the bowl used to go around, I couldn't figure out why people were putting money in, so I used to take it out and came past me. Maybe that was the indication way back when I was hanging out places like this. And such a beautiful place it is. And before I continue, I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather. Turrbal people to the north of the river, Yagara people to the south. I reside on Bullabul land that runs south Brisbane down to Minjerribah, where whitefellas would call from Cannon Hill to Stradbroke Island. And I'm very honoured to be able to reside on Bullabul land. And I encourage you all here to find out where you actually reside and show respect to the land of the peoples, the First Nations people introduction. You've been a tireless advocate for women, and you continue, and you inspire me to keep doing what I do, because you take them on in federal parliament, and you're a winner all day, every day, and I love watching you fight and struggle to stop violence against women and to ensure that all women have rights in this country. So thank you. I want to thank the organisers for inviting me to speak tonight. As Claire said, I have no idea why I'm in this peace lecture. It's sort of like it's a bit oxymoronic, considering that piece that you read out of my book really does sum me up, and yeah, peace is probably something that may be a challenge. But I know that I'm striving towards peace. So I acknowledge the organisers and the invite tonight. Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge Sisters Inside staff that are here tonight, and I know that some of the young women are coming. They are not arrived yet, I can't see them, but they will arrive here. And I'd also like to thank Leah for your two beautiful songs. Just sounded brilliant here in the Cathedral. Thank you. I also acknowledge criminalised and imprisoned women. I want us to remember, as we have had the freedom to come here tonight, as I have, to deliver this and for you to receive, that there's many women, thousands of women throughout our prisons in this country that at 7:30 tonight will be in lockdown, away from their children and their families. Some doubled up, some tripled up due to the mass incarceration. Many of them Aboriginal women, nearly 40%. If you go to North Queensland, over 80% of Aboriginal women in our prisons. And our prisons are a clear indication of what is happening in our communities. And there's so many women in prison that are there for minor offences, who I believe should never be in prison in the first place. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But I want us to think of them tonight as we do have the freedom to be here and choose to go where we choose to go. When I was asked to present this year's Peace Lecture for the United Nations International Day of Peace, I had three distinct reactions. The first was gratitude to stand before this amazing audience and tell you about the ideas and philosophies that are so close to my heart. The second was a question. What does the word peace really mean? Because we usually think of war when we think about peace. So I went straight to the dictionary, and this is what I found. Peace is freedom from war or violence. And I'll come back to my third reaction later, because I want to begin this lecture by looking at that through the prism of women's, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's experience of the criminal injustice system. Because make no mistake, the war against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women that began in this country 2 centuries ago is still raging right under our noses. That same war is also raging against young people and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander boys and men. We used to talk about the criminalisation of women by talking about women in conflict with the law. Now we have a broader analysis, and we understand that women are criminalised and imprisoned by a legal system that is inherently racist, sexist, and that targets the most marginalised and disadvantaged in our communities. That inflicts psychological, physical, and emotional violence on those women daily. And to me, is a good description of any war, anywhere. Women are not in conflict with the law. Women are not at war with the law. Rather, conflict is built into a system that ensures the disadvantaged and marginalised are punished on behalf of us all. Prisons are a default response, the government's default response, to poverty, domestic and family violence, homelessness, and mental illness, especially for women and girls. And all of this is multiplied and intensified for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls. Prisons are without doubt perpetrators of violence against women. I know, I've lived it. Both in youth prisons and adult prisons, I've witnessed this violence, I've experienced this violence. I've seen my closest friends worn down and destroyed by a system system hell-bent on punishing the already punished. Beautiful, gentle, intelligent, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls who deserve and who are worth the same bright, positive lives and opportunities given to non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls in this country, who find themselves not just as disadvantaged by being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and therefore at the mercy of policies that take no heed of them, but targeted by police who see a young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman on the street and see trouble. And I'll give you a bit of a graphic illustration of this. And I want to talk to you about Mary. I've called her Mary. And I'm sure now that all the young women have arrived and sitting at the back here may touch some of their underbelly because it's part of their story, their lives. So Mary was born into the world after her mother was raped. Child protection intervenes. The state intervenes, not to support Mary's mother, but to remove Mary and place her in foster care. Not with her kinship carers, not Aboriginal carers or family, but with a foreign white family. Mary was continually raped and abused time and time again and moved from foster care family to foster care family. She would tell child safety officers what was happening to her, the violence that was being inflicted on her within those foster families, but they would not believe Mary. She was called a little liar, a little story maker, and a little troublemaker. Mary was moved at least 15 times to different white foster families. Not allowed to see her mum most of the time because mum couldn't afford a lawyer and legal aid wouldn't fund her to be able to appear in court for child protection orders. So the Department of the State got an 18-year order for Mary to stay in their care. So she never used to see mum much, and being moved from family to family, white family to white family to white family, she never had access to her cultural roots, to her community, to her extended family. Mary was eventually placed in residential care, which is a program that is funded by this state government and many other jurisdictions around the country, where foster children are placed if they are deemed too difficult or foster families don't want them anymore because they're too old. They're not supposed to go into that regime until they're at least 12, but we know of girls that have been placed in there at the age of 10. They are run by non-government organisations, and usually youth workers are employed to manage the house so that the women stay in. Mary, because of the trauma and the violence that has been inflicted on her, has largely missed out on most of her schooling. So she reacts to behaviours when the workers come from a position of power over and where she feels threatened because she's been so traumatised. And her reaction could be grabbing the phone off the youth worker or kicking a hole in the wall. And the response of the youth workers is to call the police. I know that when my children were upset and if they kicked a hole in the wall, as I'm sure you all did in this room, was to call the plasterer, not the police. But the police are on speed dial and they're called. And the criminalisation of Mary begins with charges of willful damage, which are very serious under the criminal code, with obstruct police. If the police come, she will not go with them, and the offences accumulate. So Mary is now trapped in a system where, and a cycle, that she's in residential care, she's so-called misbehaved because of her trauma and a behaviour that comes from that trauma. Police are called, she's criminalised, she's back in front of the courts. Eventually she is remanded into youth prison because she can no longer be on bail. The courts are basically fed up with seeing Mary's black face. So now she's in youth prison, and then we have that cycle of violence. And we all know what is going on in our youth prisons. We've seen the CCTV footage of Don Dale, yes, of the boys. My question was, what was happening to the girls? If that was happening to the boys, I can guarantee you that would be would have been more and abysmal and horrendous for the girls. And then we saw the CCTV footage and still photographs of Cleveland Youth Prison up in Townsville. Once again of the boys, some of the girls, still footage of the girls that had jumped into the swimming pool and refused to get out. Now the response was then to get guard dogs and attack dogs, basically to have a go at them when they're trying to get out of the pool. I know if my child jumped in the pool and refused to get out when I told them to, I wouldn't get a savage dog to attack them and a number of security guards to surround the pool. I would just wait them out, because eventually they'd be cold, they'd be hungry, and they would want to get out and have a shower, get into warm clothes and have a feed, and then we'd deal with the issue of them being in the pool and not getting out. But no, when we use and have prisons, we use carceral mechanisms such as savage dogs, such as restraint belts, such as spittles, such as beds where women are tied down, and it goes on. And that's what's happening in our systems now. So this is how Mary is being violated again now by systemic abuse. By the time she's 17, she's charged as a 17-year-old, and we know in Queensland that she is charged with adult charges and could be one of those children like Master Clayton that we saw at Brisbane Correctional Centre CCTV footage recently that was released, and the violence that was inflicted on him as a 17-year-old. And this is what happens. These are not one-off occasions. So this is what is happening to Mary. So now let's extrapolate Mary's experience out to the wider community. In particular, let's look at youth justice, which has been in the media, as I've talked about in the spotlight more recently. And I suppose I just want to give you a little bit of data to put this in context about who are we talking about. What young people are we talking about? So according to the latest Productivity Commission report, which deals with 2013-2014, there were 794 children in Australian youth prisons. Of those, 58.3% were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. In Queensland, there were 184 children in our youth prisons, and there's 2. Of those, 65.2% were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. This is in a country in which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people represent 3% of the population, and in which overall Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children make up 8% of all 10 to 17-year-olds. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls in Queensland are 33 more times likely to be in prison than non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls. 33 more times likely. Girls, they say, comprise 80% of the total youth prison population. So that is, when we think about the actual girls, 31 girls out of 172. And of those girls, an astounding 71% were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So let's unpack that figure. It means that of 31 girls overall in Queensland's youth prisons, 22 of them out of the 31 were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls. We're talking about small numbers, but very high numbers of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls. And that figure should appall us and shame us all. I know that it's a figure that stops me sleeping at night, thinking 31 girls. What are we as a community, the Queensland community, doing for 31 girls? There's more than 31 people here tonight. It's a figure that drives me mad with outrage and grief, and it should stop all of us sleeping at night. It should drive us all to the barricades of the invisible war, flying flags of outrage and grief. This loss of innocence and potential is our loss. Our loss collectively and our fault collectively. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are more likely to end up behind bars, not because they're bad or inherently flawed, but because they're more likely to be disadvantaged. removed from their families, to be absent from school, to experience violence, racism and trauma, to abuse substances, to self-medicate because of that trauma, more likely to have a disability or a mental illness. And we have known this for a very, very, very long time. 25 years ago, this was the focus of the Royal Commission to Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which found that these same social and health issues often determined contact with the criminal and justice system. These issues needed, they said, 25 years ago to be urgently addressed, and they're still not addressed 25 years on. So let me contextualise these horrific figures by looking briefly at the wider picture of women's incarceration in Australia and in Queensland, and about the role of sisters inside the overall war against women in the criminal and justice system. The vast majority of women prisoners in Australia and internationally for that matter have committed minor non-violent offences. The average stay in prison for a woman here in south-west Queensland during last year, 2015, was 4.96 weeks. 4.96 weeks. And 94% of the women in prison in this south-east Queensland corner serve less, 12 months or less. The few serious violent crimes committed by women are usually against violent partners, and women rarely commit serious violent acts towards strangers. So when we talk about women in prison, we are not talking about major crime figures here or threats to our community. But it's impossible to talk about criminalised women without examining the factors that contribute to their so-called offending. The most important, most standout difference between the histories of women prisoners and men is women's past experience of violence. Over and over, studies show that at least 85% of women in prison in Australia have been victims of violence of some kind, abuse of some kind. Most have experienced multiple forms of incidences of violence. But those figures are based on government and academic research. In my experience, many women are loath to share personal information with authorities, and I prefer to go with the findings of Sisters Inside's own surveys, which show that 98% of women prisoners in Queensland alone have been victims of violence. 98%. Other independent surveys show that 89% of women in prison have been sexually abused, and up to 85% had experienced child sexual abuse. More than a third of these report this sexual abuse occurred before they were 5 years of age. It's hard for me to stand here and try to describe how overwhelmingly disadvantaged women prisoners are. It is difficult to overstate it. They represent the most socially, culturally and economically marginalised populations in Australian society. Every piece of research rams at home universally that women prisoners have a history of poverty, housing insecurity and homelessness, victims of horrific sexual, physical and psychological abuse, unemployment, poor education outcomes. Many haven't even got to high school. Poor health. The majority experience mental health issues or substance abuse issues. Institutional intervention. More than half have been in state care as a child. Many have been in youth prison during their teenage years. Some were born in prison themselves. A significant proportion of women prisoners face the added challenges of an intellectual learning disability, of coming from a culturally and linguistic background. Some are refugees, and most significantly, a huge majority of women prisoners are the mothers of dependent children, with most having been the heads of a single-parent household prior to their incarceration. The experience of prison takes all the unfairness, the injustice, the poverty, the abuse, the effects of abuse, the racism, the violence, the sexism, and repeats it. Makes it part of a woman rather than just an experience to be shrugged off. And tragically, it adds shame, trauma, and grief to the mix. Most women leave prison traumatised. poorer, if possible, than before, vulnerable, virtually unemployable. For majority, their mental health and physical health is even worse from when they hit the front gates of the prison. Yet we expect them to be just like us, to get a job, a house, furnish it, fill the fridge with food, get the kids back from care, from the state, re-establish good relationships in the community. For most, this is impossible. Who will employ them? Who will give them accommodation? Where will they get a fridge, let alone food to fill it? How will they convince the Department of Child Safety, the state, that they can mother their children? How will they get their families to relate to them? No wonder so many return to prison. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, you need to take all that disadvantage, abuse and trauma and grief and magnify it at least 1,000 times, if not more. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women continue to be punished for surviving historic oppression and ongoing domestic and family violence, unrelenting racism and severe disadvantage. And some other horrifying, terrifying statistics, and this is from Corrective Services' own figures, women on remand, that is, women who are not even convicted of an offence, can account for up to 40% of women in prison. Sisters inside, we have observed that many situations where women are in prison on remand come down to two key factors: homelessness and lack of access to mental health services. Prisons have become the de facto mental health institutions, homeless shelters, dry out facilities, and the actual response to victims of horrific violence in our community. This creates a circular problem. The effects of repeated victimisation and abuse are often anxiety, depression and other mental health issues, along with substance abuse. Too many survivors find it difficult to access community mental health and rehab services. Too many women return to prison on minor breaches of their parole that are connected to these issues. So, how do we achieve anything that resembles justice and fairness in these often horrific circumstances? Let's look briefly at the big picture and the small one. Let's look at what if. What if every child was born onto a level playing field? What if each of these children that are born onto the level playing field was protected and nurtured and did not experience violence in their lives? What if every child received equal access to health, education, shelter, food and a safe home? What if every child was seen as belonging to the human race as one, rather than into a racialised world as we see it now? At Sisters Inside, we're trying for that bigger picture and also working on the small one. In terms of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women especially, we believe that it takes a community of caring and attentive relationships to give today's young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women any chance of even entering the playing field. Most of the young women in our circle have been in care, come from struggling families, living in horrendous poverty, or have had close family members in prison. Some have experienced the war I spoke of earlier, the one that targets girls of colour like them. At a personal level, I have responded by establishing and maintaining those close relationships from the time these girls are either born or quite small. In our young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Women's Art program, we have had over 50 beautiful young women and the majority that I have known since they were babies go through that program. Each of them has struggled in some way. We've kept them close, offering them alternatives like art programs, our fitness programs, music programs, showing them love and respect for their needs and ambitions. And I'm delighted to say that every one of them now has either returned to or finishing their schooling, are actively in or looking to join the workforce.